hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me talk? I'm testing it. Ariana, can you hear me? You can hear me? Oh. Paul, can you hear me? Paul, Maggie, can you hear me? No. Maggie, can you hear me now? Can you? Before was better? Is that better? Oh. Paul, can you hear me? No. I might just have to yell.
Well, it's also an issue because if Paul, it's not coming through the system, then you're also not coming through on YouTube.
Ah.
All right, try that.
Paul, can you hear me now?
That's definitely coming through.
Okay.
I predict.
You want to wait a few more minutes?
Well, a couple more people. Yeah, people are still quick. I predict that everybody who's here is going to say to everyone who's not here, "You should have been there."
Probably.
Yeah, and that's what happens, I think, consistently. Were you at the first one? Police chief?
Yep. All right, I'm just going to put this in this book. Well,
I would offer to hook it on the back of your passport.
No,
That would be
no.
very inappropriate.
We're good. In case I get a hot flash, I'm going to take this off.
I was only trying to be nice. This is who we see here is our community. This is the TCS community. We have another couple of pictures.
I see people coming in the door.
See, I told you there would be 10 more people. And that's
Yeah, it's the normal TCS. Door. Okay.
You do a lot of public speaking?
No.
No. Because you look like you're very focused.
Yeah.
And like if I would shut up, you would be happier.
It's okay. So, is there a way to like bend this down a little bit more? It's like in my eye, so I'm afraid it's going to interfere with me. You can.
take it off your ear.
Oh, I have it like. Can we do it while it's on me? Because I have my earring. Okay. That's better. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, really? Oh, sorry. And they can hear me on YouTube. No, I think you can just start.
Oh, sorry. Oh, you want me to start?
Well, is he supposed to start?
I'll go ask him. So, when you're ready, You ready?
Ready?
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the third of our 5 speakers this season at TCS. We are delighted to welcome our president this morning to talk about book publishing.
Thank you.
Jen has told me that she is planning to speak for about 30 minutes, followed by presumably about 30 minutes of questions and answers. We invite people on YouTube to watch for the whole thing, but then those on YouTube are not invited to join us for bagels and donuts and coffee next door. about what's coming up next. On April 28th, the fourth of our speakers is going to speak. Dr. Delaney is going to talk about patient safety and women's health issues here. It's a Monday night. And then the next month, Dr. Paul Schreiber is going to talk about his career as a pediatrician and lessons he has learned from a career in pediatrics. So we're going to come back to all of those as standard format, about a 30 or so minute talk, followed by 30 or so minutes of questions and answers, followed by, so please come back, and those of you on YouTube, come back again. Jen, I'll turn it over to you. I will only tell you one final thing about Jen. She has put a lot of time and effort into this. She's extremely enthusiastic, and I, for one, am really looking forward to hearing about book publishing and why you are president of TCS.
Good morning, everybody. Yes, Gary asked me to talk about what I do and why I do it as far as book publishing and also presidency. So I thought, okay, I will do my best to merge those two things together. So what I do actually came to me by accident. To better explain that, I should share some of my early background. Unlike my own kids, when I was in high school and embarking on college, I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. None. I envy my kids because they found their passions relatively early on, which I did not. And I knew I was good at math because it made sense to me, and I always had a correct answer, but I didn't particularly like it. And I didn't have any real role models, per se, that did really cool things that I thought were cool. I had some hobbies, like dance class, the flute, and swim team, all of which I basically did because I had to pick something, and that was where the carpool was going anyway. So I was always very crafty, but I never thought of that particularly as a skill. Just something sort of I did and I leaned towards, often so I could make gifts instead of purchase them because I was also very thrifty. Little did I know that being a maker would resurface as a major core value for me later in my life. So needless to say, I applied to college and went because that's what people did, and that is how I would make my parents proud. When faced with choosing a college, I narrowed it down to University of Rochester and SUNY Binghamton. There was something about Rochester I really loved. It was a beautiful school, it felt like something new and a little bit like an adventure, a place no one would know me and maybe I could be a new me. I also liked Binghamton, especially because it felt like home. It was basically an extension of my high school, and everywhere I looked, I saw people just like me. That was comfortable. The biggest difference was the cost. Rochester was $20,000 a year at that time. I know, sounds like a bargain now. Binghamton was $5,000 a year, and I was extremely appreciative that my parents could afford to send me to either, which was very fortunate. But I had a hard time rationalizing spending the extra for Rochester when I couldn't confidently say it was 75% more. So I chose Binghamton, and having no career aspirations, I took one class in every department. By the time I got to my sophomore year, I had satisfied most of my core requirements and still had no direction. But then I took a writing course and a drawing course, neither of which I ever thought myself to be very good at, but this was different from high school writing and art classes. These classes released a creativity in me I could have never really predicted. As young Opus, from one of my favorite children's books by Berkeley Breathed, said, when his grandma asked him which book she should read him, he says, the one with the rhymes, the same one you've read me 209 times. And she proceeds to say, good night to the moon, good night to the lamp and little toy boat, good night to the floor, good night to the walls, good night to the rug and the door and the halls, good night, tiny mouse, and good night, blue moonshine, good night. And then Opus says, I can't really say how this happened next, but after 210 times, I departed the text. Opus proceeds to embark on a great adventure, and at the end he finds his way home and proceeds to tell his grandma all about what happened that night, that he had stepped out for once and followed his sight, and that sometimes it's good that we look for a way to depart from our text and get carried away. So once I realized I may have found a new sight, I reflected on where I was and realized Binghamton was strongest in the sciences, and if I turned my focus to writing and art, I would exhaust the faculty and classes available to me quite quickly. So I decided to leave school, much to my parents' dismay, It was too late for me to transfer to another school, so I decided to take a year off to figure out my next steps. I moved to Burlington, Vermont to live with my childhood friend who was at UVM at the time. And while there, I got a valuable life lesson in survival. I had to hold down 4 part-time jobs to make my rent. And in the process, I figured out I would never again be a waitress. I was awful. I worked in a ski shop even though I hated the snow. I watered office plants at night, very lonely. I walked dogs, and then I got a job at the Vermont Times newspaper, writing their calendar section. It was that newspaper job that first exposed me to publishing, and I was hooked. I loved writing and seeing my name in the masthead. I loved writing, watching the staff do paste up and seeing all those bits and pieces turned into a printed piece that people would actually read. When I did finally return to school, I chose Connecticut College, which as a small liberal arts school had a lot of opportunities for writing and art courses. And it allowed me to design my own major, which was writing and illustration. However, with little actual drawing talent, my form of illustration was primarily photography and ceramics. Publishing is one of those odd professions that generally does not exist as a college major. Until Emerson began their publishing program, the only way to get publishing experience in the academic arena was to take a publishing certificate program, like Denver or Radcliffe, which I did not do. And those are as add-ons to a bachelor's. Most publishing professionals just learn on the job, especially in the area of book production, where I landed. By the time I got to Connecticut College, I had matured quite a bit and experienced living on my own, so I was very driven and treated my remaining years of undergrad much like grad school. I took a full class load, but I also got a job at a local tourism magazine called Discover Connecticut Magazine, which I produced with just one other person. The owner was a local real estate agent who knew nothing about publishing, so my colleague and I just had to figure it out as we went. She did most of the writing and editorial as well as selling some advertising, although I did some of that as well. And I did most of the design, production, and manufacturing, although she did some of that as well. It was trial by fire, but an amazing learning experience for both of us. It was the true meaning of fake it till you make it. By the time I got close to graduation, I had my sights set on moving to Boston. And I landed a job at Bob Adams, Inc., which published 3 career magazines, as well as many nonfiction books, including the still popular Everything series, which you all might have seen. After working there for a few years and learning a lot more about magazine publishing, they sold that division to Kaplan. And I decided what I really wanted was children's book publishing. I got lucky. A friend of mine had a sister-in-law who was a children's book editor at Little Brown, which at that time was on Beacon Hill in Boston, and that connection got my foot in the door. This was my ultimate dream job. I was producing books for one of the top 5 publishing houses, and our books were constantly on the bestseller lists. I also joined the networking group, Book Builders of Boston. That really expanded my professional network. And I ran their annual book show at the Copley Plaza Hotel for 3 years in a row. And it's really cool because at the book show, the winners are all listed. We actually create a bound book for the show, and I was largely involved in that as well. However, although dream job, this job was also my first, but not my last, experience with a very challenging manager who was not only manipulative, but actually tried to frame me in a mistake to get me fired. I was not her first victim. She had been in the business for many years, but instead of seeing my potential and fostering that, she felt threatened and created a very toxic environment. This was very apparent to many, including her manager, who thought highly of the work that I was doing. He was very supportive of me. And when a position opened up for reprints of Little Brown and Warner books, they were combined at the time, both children's and adult imprints, as well as the art book imprint Bullfinch, I told him I wanted that job. He said it was a real reach and normally required a few more years' experience, but I told him I could do it. And I asked him to take a chance on me. And if it didn't go well, he could let me go. He acquiesced, and it was an incredible challenge, but not one that I would back down from. I was juggling approximately 400 reprints at all times, many of which were bestsellers that had extremely rushed schedules. This was also when Oprah first started her book club, and a few of her very first picks were Little Brown titles or Warner Book titles. These were top secret, and she demanded absolute confidentiality. When she would pick a book, only the editor, the sales manager, and myself knew, and we had to print upwards of 700,000 copies in 5 days. I had to spread them around to different printers to make this happen. The covers had to have her logo on them, which her team had to approve, and the cartons had to be labeled with a secret code name and information on the carton instructing the bookstores not to open until 3 p.m. the day that she announces it. She would threaten that if any information leaked out ahead of time, she would pull the book from her show, and we would be stuck with 700,000 copies of a book we could never sell. It was incredibly high pressure, but I loved every minute of it. I could have done that job forever, but alas, things don't always last forever. In 2002, they decided to move all the development departments to the New York office, and I was pregnant with our first child at the time, and we knew we did not want to raise kids in New York City. So I declined the move, and my last day was just 2 weeks before I was scheduled to go on maternity leave. After our daughter Ariana arrived, I thought maybe I could put all my camp counselor experience and my love of children's literature into practice and be a happy stay-at-home mom. That lasted about a year, and then I was desperate to get back into the professional world. But since so much trade publishing had moved to New York, all that was left were smaller independent publishers that didn't have large enough lists that warrant a full-time production manager. So as a side gig, while I had actually been working at Little Brown, I had started this, a friend of mine got his book published by a very small publishing company, and they did not have a staff to produce a high-end hardcover, which is what he wanted. So he hired me to do the production freelance. That was this book. When I realized I was not going to find a full-time production job, I took a part-time job at David R. Godine in Boston and further developed my freelance production business to fill in the gaps. After being at Godine for about 5 years, I got offered another part-time production manager with Nicholas Brealey Publishing. They did business books. And then another with Applewood Books. I pieced all these part-time jobs together while continuing to do freelance production on the side. The variety of books I was producing was extraordinary, and I was also developing my management and multitasking skills. Unfortunately, all 3 of these companies were run by narcissistic, arrogant men who only ever worked for themselves, never had another job, and had terrible management skills. I ended up often becoming a buffer between them and the other employees, just in order to keep things running and to keep people from quitting. These experiences taught me everything about the type of manager I never wanted to be, and in turn instilled in me the skills of as being an effective manager. And to this day, I remain really good friends with many of the people I've hired and worked with along the way. My father always told me to be successful in your job and to be a good manager, you need to never be indispensable. You need to teach people under you everything you know. That is the only way they can rise up to fill in your shoes, leaving you free to learn, grow, and be elevated to the next level. I always took this advice to heart, and it has worked very well for me throughout my career. So while still working at all 3 companies and continuing my freelance production business, self-publishing started to be a thing. And I had clients coming to me, freelance clients coming to me and asking me not only to produce their books, but to actually publish them. These were artists or authors who wanted to self-publish them, but they had other professions, and they wanted a professional-looking book, not the cheap cookie-cutter paperbacks that they could get through the self-publishing websites at that time. They also wanted their book to be available in bookstores and online on Amazon. So I left Godine and started to develop what I called a co-venture publishing company. I had no capital to be producing and manufacturing books prior to sales, so I flipped the traditional publishing deal on its head. In a standard publishing contract, the author or illustrator gets 7 to 10% royalties on the retail price of the book. All of my clients were people with other professions who just happened to want to write a book, and they were willing to finance it so long as it looked professional and was distributed widely. So in 2013, JMD Publishing was born, and it had 2 imprints, Curly Q Press and Benna Books. The authors would pay me for all the upfront development costs, such as editorial, design, and production, and they also paid to manufacture the books, so they owned the stock. In turn, I gave them a 55% royalty. I also partnered with Applewood Books, my employer at the time, to be my distributor, which got my books into bookstores nationally and on Amazon. I even got to write my own children's book, here, which I was excited to do since the perfect story had presented itself to me. And I finally got to see how it felt to be the author in the publishing experience. That's my book. Everything was going great until I realized there are just not enough hours in the day or night, and something had to give. Coincidentally, Nicholas Brealey, who I was still working for part-time, had just been bought by Hachette, who had also bought Little Brown. And I was back working part-time in the Little Brown offices in Boston. But that seemed a bit tenuous situation, so I left that and decided to just focus on my own company and my job at Applewood Books. I loved the creative side of owning my own company, and I really felt what I was doing was unique, and it really filled a void in the publishing industry. However, the operational side of the business was really overwhelming, and I knew I didn't have the bandwidth to do it justice, only doing it part-time. But it wasn't lucrative enough for me to give up my job at Applewood. Turned out that Applewood was so intrigued by my business model and saw ways they could incorporate it into their larger business that they offered to buy my 2 imprints and retain me as publisher of them under the Applewood umbrella, and proceeded to then hire me full-time. This was the first time since leaving Little Brown in 2002 that I was working for just one company. It felt amazing. I continued on at Applewood until about 6 months into COVID. Applewood had largely shut down during that time because most of their books sold to museums and national parks, all of which were shuttered. I knew Applewood was considering selling, so I reached out to my network, and I heard that the production director job at Charles Bridge Publishing was retiring after the gentleman there was retiring after 40 years. So I put my hat in the ring, and I landed the job. This is honestly the first company I have worked for where I am truly valued for what I have to offer. I don't have to navigate arrogant egos or moody, unprofessional managers, and instead of constantly feeling like I have to prove myself, I'm given accolades for just doing what I do. It has been an amazing experience and exactly how I would have hoped the final chapter of my career would play out. One of the things I value the most in my current position at Charles Bridge is having a role in the strategic management of the company. Being a manager is one of my favorite parts of my job, and I have established myself in a leadership role not just in the development of the projects, but also in the more general areas of mentoring and employee morale. I've been able to apply my skills in process, creation, and efficiency, the core skills used in book production, to help make the company run more smoothly and contribute some substantial savings to our bottom line. I feel that my career journey has certainly prepared me well for the business aspects of my role as Temple president. Being able to combine my skills in leadership and management, creating process and increasing efficiency, together with my core values of community, family, and Judaism, has been really rewarding. And the leadership aspects of the job come partially from my career development, but also from influences in my life. Leadership is an attribute which developed over time throughout my career, but also has a hereditary component. And if you ever asked me or my family or friends when I was a teenager if I would someday be president of my temple, I and they probably would have just been shocked to know I was even a member of a temple. I grew up in a kosher home, and my family were members of the conservative synagogue in Poughkeepsie, New York. My father got hired at a college by IBM, and their headquarters at that time was in Poughkeepsie. My parents, both born in Massachusetts, were transplants to New York, as was most of the community, all young professionals brought there by IBM. With very few of them having family local, the synagogue became our extended family. We spent holidays, vacations, Shabbats, and all our free time together. It was quite utopian, actually. Still to this day, the parents that are still with us show up at every B'nai Mitzvah, wedding, bris of grandkids, and now even great-grandkids. My parents actually went to a marriage retreat in the Poconos in the 70s called Marriage Encounter. I don't know if anybody's heard of it. They had a Christian version and a Jewish version of the retreat, which was supposed to teach you how to communicate with your spouse to provide a lasting relationship. And after you went through the weekend, they sent you home with a list of other couples who had also been to the retreat. So you could create a support group at home if you wanted. Well, my parents did this. There were 6 couples in their group. They called themselves The Image, and they met every month. This group began in 1978 and continued to meet every month for almost 40 years. And not a single couple got divorced. Their 20th anniversary book, we had a big party, was one of my earliest book projects, and also one of the ones I'm most proud of. An Image of Marriage, not available online anywhere. Sorry. So anyway, that was a bit of a tangent, but it speaks to the part of my upbringing where our temple really was the center of our religious, social, and educational world. Practically everything we did was in some way connected to the temple. My father was president of the temple. He actually went on to become president of United Synagogue and vice president of United Synagogue International. My mother was president of Sisterhood, treasurer of the temple multiple times. This type of leadership for the community was role modeled for me extensively. However, at the time, I was not conscious of any of that. And I was actually pretty disinterested. Every Friday night, we would have Shabbat dinner and then go to services, but things started to get dicey when I got into high school and school dances or other events were on Friday nights, and I was not allowed to go. I started to greatly resent being Jewish and hated the fact that my religion, which I didn't feel much of a connection to at the time, was being pushed on me. The summer after my junior year of high school, my parents told me I was going to Israel with my cousin Matthew on the USY trip for 6 weeks. I did not want to go. I was not the adventurous type, and praying 3 times a day sounded like torture. I just wanted to stay home and enjoy the summer, but they sent me off. It was rough. I couldn't sleep or eat on the plane, and the very long flight took a toll. By the time we got there, I felt incredibly sick and still hadn't eaten. I also had contact lenses at the time. In order to clean your lenses in those days, you had to use a heating device to sterilize them. I didn't realize I had to use one of those electric plug converters, and I blew up the heater. Our first stop was in the Old City, where we would take our first group photo, and as we were all standing in the heat waiting for the photo to be taken, I proceeded to pass out. So my first day there, I had almost set the place on fire. I had to wear my glasses, which were extremely ugly, and I was known as the girl who fainted. Complete humiliation. The next thing they tell us is to go to the Western Wall, and if anyone has any notes, they can put them in the wall. Before I left, my father had given me a note and told me to put it in the wall. My father was pretty stoic and didn't share his feelings openly that much, so I was walking towards the wall, which to me was just dirty and noisy, and I really did not want to be there. I took the note from my father out and read it, and it said, "Please God, take care of my little girl." I was so homesick, and I started to cry. There was no way I was about to put the most beautiful note my father ever wrote for me in this dirty wall, so I stuck it in my pocket instead. I carried that note with me the entire 6 weeks during our journey, and during that time, I really experienced a transformation. I connected with Judaism on my own terms, in a way I never could have back home. I had life-changing spiritual experiences, which I still remember to this day, and on that very last day of our journey, we went back to the wall. This time, I stood in front of it with my hands on it, praying and crying. I pulled the note from my dad out of my pocket, nestled it into a safe space in the wall, and as we left, I slowly walked backwards, away from the wall, unable to take my eyes off of it. It was the most beautiful place I had ever been. I can honestly say that my experience in Israel is what reinforced for me that I wanted to have a Jewish future and raise Jewish children. And being in an interfaith marriage and being transplants ourselves, the day-to-day experience of raising Jewish kids really fell on me, and that was hard. But this temple became my support system and my family. I knew I could not give a lot financially. Nobody gets rich on a publishing salary. But I could give with my time and energy. And over the last 16 years, I've been on and chaired multiple committees, been on the Sisterhood board and Sisterhood president, and for 12 years I've been on the Temple board and now president. For me, it was never if I would become president, it was when. As I said at my installation, when people ask me, why would you take on the presidency? I answer, it's just my turn. Our kids are so connected to their faith and their family traditions and this community, and I have TCS to thank a lot for that. I never could have done it without the support and comfort of this community, and being president is just my way of giving back and to say thank you. So that's what I do and why I do it. If you'll indulge me for a few more minutes, I do have a little bit of show and tell because I feel like throughout my life, books have told the story. They tell a story of the times we live in and the experiences we have. So there's a few books throughout my experience that have been particularly memorable for me. So while I was working at Little Brown, we published this book originally by Kathy Jacobson called My New York. And you will see on the end papers here, there's a map with the World Trade Centers. While I was at Little Brown, while I was at work, September 11th happened. And I experienced that with all of my colleagues, and it was traumatic. A couple years later, we came out with a revised edition of My New York. No more World Trade Center. So, you can see, it says a memorial. So that was very special to be able to publish this book, still with my colleagues after being through what we'd been through. So any of you who have kids or grandkids, you might know Arthur. So Little Brown published Arthur. This one is sort of funny. This shows you how authors and illustrators put themselves into their work, sometimes in sort of funny ways. So Arthur is, in the story, an aardvark. And originally, Arthur looked like an aardvark. Arthur slowly started to look less like an aardvark. His nose got smaller over time until almost no nose. And we actually came out with a revised edition of Arthur's nose because originally Arthur's nose was about having a big nose. But Arthur's creator, Mark Brown, I don't know if you could see that, looks an awful lot like Arthur does now, today. And over time, looked more and more like his creator. And we think Mark Brown also, over time, changed a few things about himself to look a little bit more like his creation. I'm dating myself, but I don't know how many of you might remember Holly Hobby. Holly Hobby became an illustrator and did this Toot and Puddle series. There's 3 books. I could not tell you how excited I was. I got to meet Holly Hobby, and I got to produce her books. That was a big thrill for me. She had a big influence in my childhood. So this was a book I did at Godine, The Lonely Phone Booth. Part of the great thing I will tell you about, when you work at a large company, you have wonderful benefits and you get to do big high-end things, but a lot of times you're sort of siloed into doing little bits of it because there's so many people. When you work for a small company like Godine, where there are only 5 of us, you get the opportunity to do a lot more things. So as a production manager, I wouldn't normally be involved in acquiring books and being the editor. However, my brother-in-law's brother is a screenwriter, and he had a great idea for this. He lives in New York City, and he had a great idea for this children's book about the very last payphone booth. So I loved it. I thought it was great. I also had seen this illustrator, Max Dalton, that I was dying to work with. So I went to David, and I said, I have a great idea for a book. I really want to acquire it. And he said, okay. And so I did. So this was the first book that I got to acquire, and we did a follow-up one that was called The Lonely Typewriter. Also at Godine, you'll see this big book here. Well, people on YouTube, sorry, you can't see it, I don't think. But the Karsh book over there, while at Godine, I did 2 Yusuf Karsh books. Karsh is the preeminent portrait photographer, really, of our time. He photographed every living president, every actor, singer, musician, athlete, you name it, of the 20th century. And a lot of these images probably are ones that you've seen before. They're very famous. And when David came to me and said that Yusuf's widow lives in Boston, and he wanted to try to do this book, he's like, you're coming to lunch with me because she'll like you, so you need to come. So I went and we had lunch with Estrelita Karsh, Yusuf's widow. She is a fascinating woman, just celebrated her 95th birthday. And she traveled with Yusuf on a lot of his sittings. So she's met all these people, and we would sit for hours and she would just tell stories about who these people are like when they're not, in front of a camera. But anyway, so I got to do this incredible book, which we produced in Switzerland with Yusuf's private printer person who he created a color called Karsh Gray, which would just produce his photographs the exact way he wanted them. It's all very proprietary, and we used amazing paper. It was just incredibly, incredibly beautiful product. But after we did that book, Estrelita and I continued to meet for lunch. We continued to forge a relationship. We're good friends now. She came to Ariana's bat mitzvah here. And I went on to do another paperback version while I was at Godine, Beyond the Camera. So this is a book that actually has not only the photographs in it, but it also has, Yusuf sat down for like a week with his assistant and went through and just talked about his recollections of these sittings with these people and things he remembered. And it was all recorded. And so I had asked for those recordings, and we transcribed it all, and so it's Yusuf's words in here about the photos when he took them. So this is Beyond the Camera. This is really exciting. And then I did a third book on Karsh when I had my own publishing company, which Estrelita and I did together without Godine. And lastly, so this is a book I did at Applewood, which I'm really excited about. It was under my imprint, Benna Books. You can come feel it later if you want. It's velvet, it feels really nice. But this was exciting because I got to work with the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum on this book. This is the only book that they ever allowed to be made about the heist, the art heist. And this came prior to the podcast and the show that they have since done. So this was also a really exciting project, one I got to work directly with the museum on, and has, I think, a really interesting place in history. So that is it. I am happy to sign any books if anybody would like to purchase a book. I'll be over here doing that. But thank you, that's me.
So we're going to take some questions, but can I use organizer's prerogative to tell you what I took away?
Sure.
I took 3 ideas away from your talk. First of all, thank you for interpreting what I do and why in your own idiosyncratic way. But second, it takes a tremendous amount of courage to stand up in front of a group and say, here is what I did in my life. Here's the stuff that didn't go well, and here's the stuff that did go well. So I commend you for your courage.
Thank you.
I also found that listening to your career development was just a testament that how people who are courageous and clever can come up with really interesting maneuvers to go from college, which is what middle-class Jewish kids go from, to becoming a waitress and stumbling into a newspaper job which said, oh, this is what I want to do now, and back and forth to starting your own imprint. Like, wow, you can't predict this stuff.
No.
You can only describe it retrospectively. And that was fascinating.
Thank you.
Bunch of turns.
Long and winding road is what I call it.
Going in a direction that makes sense.
Yep.
And the third takeaway is, I think everybody here at TCS has a story what I do and why I do it. But, in your direction, everybody has a direction to go in. It's a great way for us to learn about each other. So if others want to speak, please come and talk to me, schedule it, do what Jen did. Back to you for questions. I'll get out of the way.
Two quick questions. JMC.
JMD.
What did that stand for?
Jennifer Most Delaney, Publishing. My middle name is Most, which is my maiden name.
Didn't know that. And that the first Connecticut thing that you did with just the two of you, do you have a copy of that? Earlier in your talk, you talked about.
Discover Connecticut Magazine.
Right. Do you have
I have some copies at home, I think, in the depths of a box somewhere. Yes, the question was if I still have copies of the magazine Discover Connecticut. So.
This was, for me, was almost like going to a movie. It was that interesting.
Thank you so much.
The whole story was just very nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
Question.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to a young person in college these days?
Okay, the question was what advice would I give to somebody in college now, a young person? I'm repeating the questions for the YouTube folks. Well, if that person is interested in publishing or just in general? In general, I would say don't worry so much about figuring it all out. Like so many kids, I think now feel like they have to go off, they have to know exactly what they're going to do, they have to know all the classes they're going to take, they have to know exactly what they're going to make when they graduate, and just live. And just, like I did, and nothing is forever. So I went to SUNY Binghamton. I didn't know what it would be to transfer. To be honest, I was so afraid. I was not a great school. I didn't love school. My parents knew that. So once I got into college, they were like, phew. But to tell them I was leaving, I'm sure they thought there was a good chance I was never going back. So I waited, and I actually was visiting a friend in London over Christmas break, and I called them from London, and I said, guess what? I'm leaving school. See you in 2 weeks. So, it's that kind of thing. Yeah, there's a lot of scariness about it, but sometimes just take a chance, and it'll work itself out. You got a good head on your shoulders, and you work out. So, anybody else? Yeah, Marjorie.
I just want to say thank you, and I love your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Marjorie. That's very sweet.
No need to be nervous.
I'm always so nervous.
I learned so much about you personally and professionally, and I love books. I love so much of what you spoke about.
Thank you.
Just fantastic. So thank you. Also, your journey in becoming more connected to Judaism and how you have followed that thread.
Thank you.
I do have one
Yeah.
question. It's tangential.
That's okay.
I was recently at an event for Raising Multicultural.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that they do, they have a whole library of books. They have an online reading for individuals, and they bring in a multicultural perspective. And one of the things that the founders talk a lot about is how marginalized communities are very rarely represented in children's books.
Yes.
And actually animals are represented much more than marginalized individuals. And so they very much have difficulty finding books about different cultures and people from different ethnicities. And I just wonder if you have any resources or if you can comment on that.
Very much so. So Marjorie's question was about books for marginalized communities and how they can be available and why they're not for children. So that, I will tell you, is one of the most wonderful things about working at Charlesbridge. Charlesbridge Publishing, which is in Watertown, Mass., has been around for 35 years, and their mission from the beginning has always been that children, no matter who they are, a child should be able to pick up a book and see themselves in the book. I know what it was like growing up as a Jewish girl in an area that was not a lot of Jews. I mean, that's why we gravitated so much to the synagogue, because in my high school, the public high school, I had 700 kids in my graduating class, and I was one of 5 Jews. So I would have been given anything to pick up a book at that time and seen, a story about, Judy Blume was the only one that was doing it, and she was doing it sort of behind the scenes. She couldn't really even come out, openly and say her characters were Jewish. But Charles Bridge has been doing books for multicultural, everything since the beginning. And they were doing it way before it has become a thing. So now everybody's really doing it, but at the time, nobody else was doing it. And we have almost every single one of our books has either direct diversity or what we call indirect diversity. So indirect diversity would be, we have these board books. One of them is called Electrical Engineering. Baby Loves Electrical Engineering. And it happens to be about Christmas lights and how they work. But we also have one about dreidels and how they spin. But we have these books, but you'll see that this little baby and four of the baby's friends, they're all of different cultures. And this series has it, and that's not what the book's about, but they just happen to be present. And we do have a lot of books that are also directly diverse, and we have a lot of books that are banned, unfortunately. So, but that's part of it. We're not going to stop doing it just because certain people don't want to see it. Those people don't have to see it if they don't want to, but the child who does want to see themselves in that book, the book is available for them. So, yeah. Cindy. No. So the question was, when a book is banned, is it not sellable? Absolutely not. The banned books are widely available. You can order them on Amazon. You can order them from your bookstore. It's only banned by the organizations that are choosing what goes into a public library. So the board of that library will put out a list and say that we are not going to fund these books, or these books are not allowed ourselves, or in certain schools. So the school boards get to decide that. But nobody gets to decide what we publish. We get to decide that. The publisher gets to choose that. So those books are definitely available, but unfortunately, the kids who maybe can't afford to buy them and want to be able to go to the library and take them out, unfortunately, in some situations can't. Yeah, Gary.
You said, when we were talking just before you spoke, that people have books inside of them.
Yes.
How do you know if you have a book inside of you? And if you're not sure, how do you figure that out?
The question is, how do you know if you have a book inside of you? Because I said that to Gary. He said at one point in his life he was dabbling with publishing a book, and I said, he should have known me then. But I think I say everybody has a book inside of them. First of all, we all have a story. Every single one of us has a story. We have something that we've connected to. My book that I published and that I wrote, I'm a one-hit wonder here. I'm never doing this again. But this was because a story came to me. I found out that the swan boats here in Boston were started by a gentleman with the name Robert Paget in the 1800s. And he, after starting the swan boats, which are actually based on an opera, he died. And his wife, Julia, had 4 little children. She's got like the hoop skirt, and and she wanted to keep the swan boats going, and she wasn't allowed because women at that time were not allowed to own businesses. So she had to get permission from all the surrounding businesses in Boston. She had to walk and get a petition signed to allow her to continue the swan boats. And to this day, the swan boats are still run by the Paget family. And it's been the women in the family over generations that have kept it going. And that's basically what this book is about. And when I was told that story, I said, why does nobody know this? And I couldn't imagine. The only book that they sold at the swan boats and that the park rangers would read on the opening day of the swan boats every year when they parade Romeo and Juliet, the 2 swans, and put them in the pond, was Make Way for Ducklings, because that's the only book that mentions the swan boats. And so when I did my book, I worked on it with the Paget family so that I got all the history right and some of the pictures right and everything. That year that this book came out, the park rangers read my book instead. And they still, if you go to the Swan Boats, they sell it at the Swan Boats, and right next to Make Way for Ducklings, they still sell. But they sell about 300, 400 copies of my book every year. So it's pretty cool. It's really exciting. They're so happy to have the book. And I told them that I will make it available and make it for sale for as long as I live, as long as I possibly can.
The Swan book is your swan song.
It is my only in being an author. Haven't found my swan song quite yet on the rest of it. But I will, just so you know, I'll be signing books and selling them over here. And whenever I do a signing, I also do a little raffle. So somebody who, if you buy a book, you come into the raffle to win a family 4-pack of tickets to the Swan Boats. Still the greatest bargain in Boston, by the way. And you don't need to have kids to go on it. It's just a really fun thing to do. No, so that is the only book that I've authored. The rest of the books I've produced. So production, and I should probably just, the question was, is this the last book I'm ever going to do? It's probably, I'll never say never, but probably the last book and the only book that I will be an author for. But book production, in case that's confusing at all, is basically means that we're involved in the book from the time it's conceived and acquired all the way until it hits the warehouse. And we work with the editorial and the design teams all along the way to refine the specifications, figure out what the paper's going to be, what the cover treatments are going to be, anything that needs to go into the book physically. We create the schedule, the production schedule for the book, and we do all the proofing. Once the final files go off to the press, then we handle reviewing all of the proofs along with the designer and editor, and we hire the manufacturing. So we do all the printing, hire the printing and the binding, and then shipping it into the warehouse. So it really is producing the physical piece. Takes about 2 years to make a book from beginning to end, from the time that it's sort of conceived and acquired until it hits the warehouse, or it goes on sale, is about 2 years. Yeah, Deb. Yeah. The question is, what age group is Swan Boat book geared towards? You know, I like to say books, you can read to them in utero. And you know, but for the nice thing, it's a picture book. It's a pretty standard picture book, which is usually probably age 3 to 4 to 9, you know, because the nice thing about picture books is you sort of do them after board books when they're done chewing on the pages. That's not great to chew on the pages of a picture book. But to be read to, and then they start to read it themselves, and then they can independently completely read it themselves. So they have a nice wide age group for picture books. When I wrote the book, it's a good question about how did I decide which age group I wanted it to be towards. I wanted it to cover a lot of range, and I knew that I wanted it to be illustrated beautifully. There's a lot of added elements in the book. I worked with the Friends of the Public Garden as well, so there's a page about all the flowers that you'll see when they're in bloom in the public garden. The end papers are a map of the garden. And so there were extra things I wanted in there, but I knew that I wanted to talk about opening day, and the story is basically about this little girl who's her family tradition. The women in the family every year on opening day go to the Swan Boats, and that's been for generations. So I sort of knew that I wanted it to be a picture book, and I wanted to gear it towards that age group. So. I have been, yes. I do go over there every summer. I say hello to Lynn. She's wonderful. Say hello to her if you go to the Swan Boats. Lynn Paget. And so I always go over at least once or twice in the summer and say hello. And, you know, I haven't ridden them in a while, but I should. Rhonda? Yes.
as I was reading it, and totally lost the story.
Yes.
How about, like, checking the historical facts?
Yes. So the question is, when we publish a book, about the proofreading and how when you're reading things you find mistakes all the time. It's incredibly frustrating and annoying. I have to put it down if I see a lot of mistakes. At Charles, but yes, so we always hire professional proofreaders. There's usually copy editors first to make sure that the story itself gels together the way it needs to. And then at the very end, there's proofreading that happens. As production, heading production department, it's not generally part of our purview, like that's more editorial, but I've always made it ours because I hate finding mistakes. So as production, I read pretty much everything. I don't read all the novels we do. I do read all the picture books. But my staff, I have somebody on my staff who I have dedicated. She's excellent. She's got eagle eyes. And she proofreads every word before they go to press. And we have often found, she finds a lot of things that the professional proofreader should have found and didn't. So you're always going to find, there's always going to be something. And we're always correcting also. If anybody sends us a correction that they write to us and say, we found a mistake in your book, we do a correction memo right away. We correct the files so it's right the next time. But if you're finding something with a lot of mistakes, it does tell you that that publishing company is not doing their job, for sure. Yeah, Libby.
I want to thank Mr. Beams for the I think it takes a lot for somebody to come up and speak to you. We're all friends, you know everybody in the room. But it still takes a lot of courage to expose things that you're really thinking about and the path along the way. And I give you tremendous credit.
Thank you, Libby. Thank you.
One is the Arthur the Arthur.
Yeah.
So I know that Arthur, and I think that Ruth can probably speak to this better than me, made his way into the curriculum of young children in school. That Arthur was very much a part of early years in school. So did the company you work for sell the rights to Arthur, who was also from PBS?
Yep, yep.
You sell the rights so that a bigger company can take over?
So the question is about Arthur, the Arthur series, and did Little Brown sell the rights to be able to have that be a bigger thing? Because it was a huge thing. No, Little Brown always retained the rights to the books and still to this day publishes Arthur. But, you know, they're Hachette now, so they're one of the biggest publishing companies that's out there. So they certainly can handle that. They did sell the film rights to PBS. And we do the same thing at my company now. Most publishing companies, it's part of the contract where you can sell the rights, not only to the film rights or the video game rights, things like that. We also sell language rights. So a lot of our books are in many, many languages around the world because we go to like the London Book Fair or the Bologna Book Fair where all the international publishing companies come together and they all sell each other rights. So we might have we retain the North American rights, but we will sell the rights to Korea or to wherever, and they sell it and they publish the book themselves in their country, in their language.
Kind of addresses Maggie, what Maggie was asking about having a message to a young person as they're about to embark on their career, and I think you explained it so beautifully when you talk about toxic work environment, misogynistic bosses, that every young person needs to understand that a career is going to be made up of peaks and valleys. That it's never, that anything, as my father used to say, anything worth doing isn't easy.
Yep.
And I think you explain that absolutely beautifully, that anybody who thinks they're going to graduate as a whatever and then go off to work and it's going to be easy is going to be bad.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of challenges with different personalities along the way, managers who, you know, aren't always out for your best interest, and that's always really challenging. You know, but my view on that is there's always a lesson to be learned. There's always something you can learn from even the most challenging people who cross your paths. For me, I learned a lot of what I never want to do as my manager, things that are not helpful. But at the same time, I grew a very thick skin. So initially, I would go home in tears after some of those days until you get a thicker skin, and that builds strength and it builds confidence in that you know what you're doing. However, it's a careful balance because it's easy to get cocky. It's easy to get too self-confident. And you also want to make sure that if somebody is, your manager or somebody above you in an executive position or whatever, is trying to get you to do things a certain way that maybe you don't think is the best way, they still have their role. You need to listen. You need to have them be heard. Half the time they just want to feel like you heard them. And then you can figure out your next steps and figure out if there's a maybe alternate way that you can present to do what they're trying to do, but maybe in another way, without just sort of putting up the hand and being negative. So it's a careful balance, and you have to understand how those people want to be spoken to, without being fake, without putting yourself and your ethics in jeopardy. But understand how they want to be spoken to, understand how they want to be heard, and then proceed in the way that your gut tells you is the best way. Ruth. Well, it used to, so the question is about ebooks and electronic books, and it was, when the ebooks first came out, you read everywhere like, that's the end of the books, everything is going to be ebooks. And I think it was like anything else. There are these peaks and valleys, and for a little while, ebooks were all the rage. Everyone had Kindle, and then people started to realize they're on screens all day long. They don't want, when they're sitting and reading a book for pleasure, a lot of people do not want to be looking at a screen. So I think the reality is book sales have not been jeopardized at all for that. People still are buying physical books, and if they're listening to a podcast or reading it at another time, it doesn't stop them necessarily from buying the physical books. And I think kids' books pretty quickly went from being on screen to kids, they still hand the iPad and everything to the kid, but I don't think it necessarily has stopped people from wanting to have their kids have physical books. So thankfully. So I only work for Charlesbridge now, so all of our books are sold everywhere. So you can find any book, and if you want a book and you go into the bookstore and they don't have it, you can always ask them to order it. They can order any book you want, and of course, there's always Amazon. My book's available on Amazon. So, Linda. Yeah. Oh. Linda. Thank you. I do have to say that this is Linda and Dave Rabinowitz, incredibly close family friends, and they are a testament to the Poughkeepsie Network. So they were in Poughkeepsie when I was growing up with their kids, and here they are today with me giving this talk, sitting here because we've stayed in touch and we are so close. They're family for sure. So that Poughkeepsie Network is family. So I welcome anybody to come up and look at the books and touch everything and whatever you want.
Thank you for that last comment. It's a wonderful way to end, which was...
Mike has one thing you want to say.
sorry, Mike. I didn't mean to cut that off.
No, that's okay. That's okay.
Oh, sorry.
I want to just put a plug in for Jen's book. I own Jen's book. It's fabulous. It's beautiful. It's on my bookshelf.
Thank you, Margie.
Thinking about it, not only is it wonderful to keep on your bookshelf, but a wonderful gift to give to your children or grandchildren. So I just wanted to say.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, thank you, Barry.
Guys, come on up and talk to Jen. Those who want fresh donuts and bagels, we're next door. We can keep talking. Please come back to the next speakers that we're going to have. And thank you for being so confident and
Thank you, Gary.
self-confident and proud and articulate.
Thank you, Gary. I'm like all caught up here.
Absolutely fascinating, and I just love the way you take the question of what I do and why I do